They thought they could afford anything: jokes, taunts, humiliation. But when one of them lifted her skirt, everything changed in seconds. They didn't know who was standing in front of them, and they certainly weren't prepared for what happened next. Subscribe and post in the comments. Where are you watching from? The air had a softness to it, a kind of gentle warmth that clung to the skin without suffocating. It was the kind of summer night that made people linger a little longer outside, finish their drinks more slowly on cafe patios, walk the long way home just to stay out in it. The city had quieted down, but it wasn't dead. Its heartbeat was a low murmur, the distant hum of engines on a freeway, the occasional bark of a dog behind a fence, the high hollow clink of a bottle being tossed into a bin behind a closed diner. Life resting just beneath the surface. Ronda walked alone. Not quickly, not slowly, just with the kind of pace that said she had no reason to rush, but every reason to stay aware. Her sneakers moved softly across the uneven sidewalk, navigating cracks and old gum spots and the occasional warped section where tree roots had pushed up from underneath. She knew this route. Knew it better than any map ever could. Her apartment wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes if she kept a steady stride, 20 if she stopped to check her messages or admire a mural someone had tagged with fresh paint over the weekend. She had left the little Mediterranean cafe down on 9th just 10 minutes ago. It was one of those family-run places with low lighting, warm spices in the air, and a friendly owner who never charged her for extra hummus. A place where nobody cared who she had once been or what her name meant to people. She liked it that way. She liked the anonymity, the ordinariness of it. There had been a time when her name had traveled further than she ever could. Headlines, interviews, endorsements, chants from the crowd, the pressure of being seen, the weight of being known. But that had all quieted. Life had shifted, as life does. She didn't fight it. She had learned, sometimes painfully, that fighting what's already gone only wears you out for what's still coming. Now she lived simply. A small apartment above a laundromat, a gym membership she barely used, a dog she was thinking of adopting but hadn't quite committed to. She taught self-defense classes once a week at a local community center, not because she needed the money, but because it felt good to give people a sense of control, a sense of confidence, something no one could take away from them. Tonight had been uneventful, just the way she liked it. She had eaten alone, sipping on mint tea and scrolling through old photos on her phone, remembering people she hadn't spoken to in years. Coaches, teammates, even a few rivals. Most of them were gone from her life now, scattered across the country or vanished into retirement like smoke into air. She didn't miss them, not exactly, but she missed the sense of being part of something. Her footsteps echoed faintly as she passed under a flickering street lamp. The bulb buzzed with fatigue, casting long, unstable shadows across the sidewalk. A block ahead, a neon sign buzzed faintly over a convenience store, open 24 hours, though rarely visited after dark. Further along, the corner where she'd turn right, past the closed pet shop and the old coin laundry, then another 2 blocks to her building. She had walked this route so often she could probably do it blindfolded, but tonight there was a prickle at the back of her neck. Not a sharp one. Just a mild awareness. The kind that comes not from danger, but from change. A shift in the usual. Something misaligned in the atmosphere. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. Her instincts had not dulled with time. If anything, they had grown sharper from being ignored. She had long since learned to separate true threats from imagined ones. This wasn't either, not yet. just something in between. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag and continued on, passing the storefronts without giving them more than a glance. Her reflection moved with her in the dark glass windows. Broad shoulders, sturdy build, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. She was no longer the headline maker, the center of the storm, but her body remembered. Every ligament and joint still held the imprint of years in the arena. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't need to. She passed the alley that led to the back of the grocery store. It always smelled faintly of bleach and overripe fruit. Tonight, it was empty. A few pigeons rustled on a roof overhead. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, distant and quickly fading. Normal city sounds. Nothing to flinch at. When she reached the intersection near the pet store, she paused to press the crosswalk button. The little metal circle was greasy, and the light overhead blinked impatiently, not ready to give her passage. She looked both ways, more out of habit than necessity. The road was quiet, save for a single vehicle approaching slowly from a block away. She noticed the shape first, boxy, unmistakable. A police cruiser, white with blue decals, the emblem of the city department emblazoned on the side. It didn't speed, didn't swerve, just moved at that slow, deliberate pace that said it wasn't in a hurry. She waited for it to pass before crossing. No need to make eye contact, no reason to interact. The car didn't pass, it slowed. Too much. Ronda glanced at it briefly, just a flick of the eyes. 3 men inside, 2 in the front, 1 in the back. She couldn't hear them yet, but she saw their faces. They were looking at her, talking, laughing, not loud enough to reach her, but unmistakably amused. She turned away, crossed the street at a measured pace, and kept moving. Behind her, the cruiser crawled forward, maintaining distance but not letting her out of its sight. The quiet tension in the air solidified. It was no longer suggestion. It was presence. She adjusted her pace, not faster, not slower, just more deliberate. Her breathing was even. Her fists were relaxed. She felt her heart, calm and steady, somewhere deep behind her ribs. She was not afraid, but she was no longer at ease. Up ahead, the sidewalk narrowed near a construction site where orange cones leaned haphazardly around a torn-up patch of curb. She would have to squeeze by it, close to the edge of the street. The cruiser was still behind her. Lights off, engine barely audible. She took the detour without hesitation. Just a woman walking home. Nothing more. But the laugh that echoed from the car now was louder. Closer. It bounced off the buildings like a stone skipping across water. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The night had changed, and something told her this was only the beginning. The laugh didn't fade as she continued walking. It lingered, low and deliberate, as if meant to announce itself without being overt. The kind of laugh that wasn't loud enough to draw attention from the surroundings, but sharp enough to pierce into her space. Ronda's stride remained steady. She didn't flinch or glance behind. She kept her eyes ahead, watching the sidewalk as it stretched toward the next block where the streetlights seemed dimmer, where storefronts gave way to low fences and shadowy front yards. The cruiser, behind her, kept moving in rhythm with her pace, maintaining a strange, crawling synchronicity. She could hear the soft crunch of its tires against loose gravel and dust along the edge of the road, a mechanical whisper that followed her without faltering. Somewhere behind that tinted windshield, they were watching. She knew that rhythm, the way power moved when it thought it was in control. She didn't need to see them to know they were measuring her, weighing the situation in their own narrow framework. Late night, lone woman, empty street, uniforms on their backs. It was too easy for them to pretend there were no consequences. She passed the construction barrier, stepping carefully between two uneven cones, and kept her steps centered to avoid the jagged crack that split the sidewalk. Just ahead, a faint pool of golden light spilled from the front window of a dry cleaner's, closed now, but the timer on its sign hadn't been reset. The light painted part of the sidewalk, and for a brief moment she was visible in full. That was when she heard the distinct click of a window rolling down behind her. Still, she didn't turn. The first words drifted out, lazy and slurred at the edges by mockery. She couldn't make them out completely, just the tone, saturated with that same familiar smugness she'd encountered before, often in locker rooms, in comment sections, in bars where people thought familiarity with her face gave them the right to reach past boundaries. The inflection was unmistakable. They weren't just amused. They were entertained by her existence, amused by her presence, and preparing for something more. The car accelerated slightly, coming parallel with her, moving just fast enough to require her attention. She turned her head a fraction, just enough to see them now. All three men were watching her. The one in the passenger seat had his arm draped out the window, fingers tapping rhythmically against the door. Young, lean, shaved head, smirking. Behind the wheel, another man, older, broader shoulders, chewing on gum slowly, like it was his job to show disinterest. The third, in the back seat, leaned forward between them, grinning wide. "You really walking around here alone this late?" one of them said, voice clear now. She didn't respond, just met their eyes for a second, then turned back to the road. No change in pace, no expression. Another voice picked up. The tone was exaggerated, theatrical. "Wait a minute, I know you. Aren't you that fighter chick? Used to choke people out and all that?" The sound of laughter bubbled between them. Someone clapped a hand against the dashboard. "Thought you were taller," came a quieter, more cutting voice, or meaner. "Kinda normal now, huh?" They weren't trying to make conversation. They were testing her. The cruiser drifted closer to the curb, tires brushing the gutter. She could hear the idle of the engine, steady and relaxed, too casual for a real patrol. They weren't responding to a call. They were here for her. The words became bolder now, stepping into the realm of the personal. One of them commented on her legs. Another made a joke about her being past her prime. The third began mimicking a sports commentator's voice, listing off her old wins like it was a parody. None of them cared whether she reacted, not yet. They were escalating for their own entertainment. She kept walking, every muscle in her body taut but disciplined. She had walked through media scrums that shoved microphones in her face, through crowds that both adored and heckled her, through hotel lobbies full of people who only saw her as spectacle. But this felt different. This was targeted, local, intimate. These weren't anonymous trolls or drunken fans. These were men with authority, uniforms, weapons, and the belief that their presence was untouchable. Up ahead, the sidewalk narrowed again, near a closed elementary school where a row of trees created patches of darkness between the lamps. Ronda considered crossing the street, but decided against it. That would be concession. She didn't give ground unless she had a reason, not even now. The car kept pace. When she passed under a particularly weak streetlight, the car sped up slightly, rolling ahead and pulling over at the corner. The passenger door opened, and the man with the shaved head stepped out. He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly, deliberately, the way someone might when they were about to approach a stranger with no urgency. His hands were loose at his sides, his expression still twisted into a half smile. He didn't say anything at first, just started walking in her direction as she approached. The other two watched from inside the cruiser, their faces partially obscured by glare, but their posture unmistakably alert. This wasn't random anymore. It was a game now, and they were playing it together. He fell into step beside her as if they were old friends. For a few seconds he said nothing, just matched her stride. Then came the question. "What's it like?" he murmured, being famous and forgotten at the same time. The comment hung in the air like a fog. She didn't respond. He clicked his tongue and grinned, then reached out, not to touch her, but to gesture in front of her, like he was painting her path with his words. "Used to watch your fights. Back in the day. You were scary then." He chuckled. "Now you just look like someone's tired older sister." She kept her eyes forward, but her peripheral vision tracked everything. The angle of his shoulders, the placement of his hands, the slow shuffle of his boots. They weren't far from the edge of the schoolyard now. It was a blind spot. No cameras, no windows from nearby homes. The trees here swallowed light. The cruiser remained still at the corner. He stepped slightly ahead of her now, turning as he walked backward, forcing her to either acknowledge him or bump into him. She didn't change course. He reached out, too quickly this time with a motion meant to startle, and tugged at the hem of her dress. Not a grab, not full contact, but a flick, a teasing provocation. "Cute," he said, nodding at her legs. "Didn't know you went out dressed like that." The silence that followed was sharper than anything he could have said. Behind her, she heard the laughter return. The engine revved gently, as if encouraging the moment to stretch. This was the part where they expected her to react. Maybe to yell. Maybe to walk faster. Maybe to get flustered or upset or furious. It didn't matter. Any reaction would feed them. But Ronda didn't react, not yet. She walked past the man as if he wasn't there, as if he hadn't said anything, as if his hand hadn't flicked the edge of her clothing. But something in the way her shoulders moved changed. Just a little. Not enough for him to notice. Not yet. The cruiser began to move again. The driver's window lowered, and the older officer leaned slightly out, calling something she didn't catch. The man beside her grinned wider, clearly emboldened, and matched her pace again. He wasn't trying to frighten her. He thought this was fun. He thought it was sport. They all did. What they didn't realize, what none of them had even begun to understand, was that something had already shifted. Not in the air, not in the street, in her. And they had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The street ahead narrowed where the sidewalk curved slightly into a cul-de-sac beside the edge of the elementary school. The branches of the overgrown trees reached overhead, crisscrossing like skeletal fingers, casting restless shadows that twitched and shifted in the breeze. The lamplight, already weak, became fragmented under the leaves, offering only brief flashes of illumination. It was the kind of place people passed through quickly at night, more from instinct than fear, a quiet pocket of the city that asked for silence and haste. Ronda didn't change her pace. The officer who had fallen into step beside her was still there, still walking close, now emboldened by the others who watched from the car. The cruiser crept forward slowly, barely audible, hugging the curb just a few feet behind. It was no longer shadowing her, it was escorting the scene they had created. An audience in motion. They had crafted a play, and she had been cast without permission. The man beside her adjusted his cap with a flick of his fingers, the brim angling downward to better hide his face. Not out of shame, but out of habit. An attempt to seem more casual, more in control. His movements were rehearsed. She had seen those mannerisms before, not in law enforcement, but in fighters who liked to pretend they didn't care about the outcome of a match. The same cocky walk, the same exaggerated shrug, the same false nonchalance. But this wasn't a match. And he wasn't an opponent. He was a problem. The street was empty. No pedestrians, no traffic. Even the windows of the nearby houses were dark, curtains drawn tightly shut against the night. A neighborhood that slept deeply, unaware of the games playing out on its sidewalks. A moment suspended in time, held together only by the rhythm of her footsteps and the murmur of the car's engine behind her. The man to her left slowed slightly, turning sideways, forcing her to adjust course unless she wanted to brush against him. She didn't flinch, didn't falter. She shifted half a step to the right, reclaiming her space without a word. That was when he did it. Quick, deliberate. A single motion that crossed from provocation into assault. His hand darted out, catching the back of her dress just above the hemline. With a flick of his wrist, he lifted the fabric upward, exposing the back of her thighs for no more than a second. It was fast, almost careless in its execution, but intentional. The kind of gesture meant to humiliate, not harm. The kind meant to provoke a reaction. The laughter from the cruiser was immediate, harsh and loud. It split the quiet night in two. One of them honked the horn, twice in rapid succession, like punctuation. The man beside her grinned, stepping back half a pace, waiting for the reaction he thought would follow. The startled gasp, the angry shout, the demand for respect. But none of it came. Ronda stopped walking. The man took another half-step back, his grin faltering slightly as he realized she wasn't turning toward him. She stood still in the middle of the sidewalk, her shoulders squared, arms relaxed at her sides, head tilted just enough to see the cruiser through her peripheral vision. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood there. For one long moment, the street held its breath. The trees above shifted slightly, leaves rustling like whispers at a funeral. The engine of the cruiser idled softly. The man beside her opened his mouth to speak again, maybe to diffuse the moment, maybe to double down, but nothing came out. She hadn't even looked at him yet, and somehow that silence held more weight than any retaliation. She turned, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that instant, the air around them changed. Whatever smugness he had been clinging to evaporated. His posture stiffened, the swagger leaking out of his limbs like air from a punctured tire. He had wanted a reaction. He had expected one, but he had not expected this. The look in her eyes wasn't fury, it wasn't embarrassment, it was focus. The kind of focus born from years of training, from knowing exactly what to do when someone crosses a line. It wasn't just discipline, it was precision, calculation. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lift a hand. She didn't need to. He took another step back. "Keep walking," came a voice from the car, uneasy now, less amused than it had been before. The driver leaned slightly out the window, eyes narrowed. He could feel the shift, too. The dynamic had changed. The joke had twisted into something unfamiliar, and control had slipped from their grasp like sand through fingers. But the man didn't move. Ronda's gaze flicked toward the cruiser. The back passenger was leaning forward again, expression less confident, more guarded. The laughter had died. Only the car's engine spoke now, and even that seemed uncertain. She took a step forward, not toward the man beside her, but past him. She walked by him as if he didn't exist, as if the entire exchange hadn't happened. But the silence in her wake was thunderous. The man stood frozen, his hand still at his side, the heat of his own shame crawling up his neck. The car inched forward again, trying to reassert its presence, but it no longer felt like an extension of authority. It felt like a retreat, like the beginning of a withdrawal. Ronda kept walking. Her mind was clear, her breath steady. Every part of her body was in control, anchored not in anger but in awareness. She knew what they had tried to do. She knew what it meant, and she knew what it could have become had she been someone else. Had she not been who she was? Had she not known how to carry herself in the moments where others thought they held power? Behind her, the cruiser rolled forward, then stopped again. She didn't turn to look. The presence of the vehicle felt less like a threat now and more like a question mark. Hesitant, uncertain, grasping for a way to reset the balance. But the balance was already gone. She reached the edge of the block and turned left without pause, disappearing into the next stretch of quiet street. The trees overhead parted slightly, allowing the moonlight to return. Her shadow stretched out ahead of her, long and steady. The path to her apartment was still a few minutes away, but she didn't rush. She had reclaimed the night, footstep by footstep. Behind her, the street remained still. For now, but something had been broken. Not in her, in them. Ronda walked. Her steps were steady, measured, as if nothing had happened. The night still stretched ahead, silent and vast, her path uninterrupted. But she could feel the shift behind her, the unraveling tension in the air. The moment she had left them standing there, frozen, caught between arrogance and hesitation, something had begun to crumble. It was in the way their laughter had stopped, in the way the engine of the cruiser idled longer than necessary, in the way the man who had touched her hadn't moved, as if uncertain of what had just transpired. They weren't used to silence. They were used to reactions, to women flinching, shrinking away, quickening their pace. They were used to the power that came from their uniforms, from the weight of the badge clipped to their chests, the knowledge that most people wouldn't dare push back. But this had been different. She had taken the moment from them, seized control in a way they didn't understand, not with words, not with force, just with a look, just with a pause, just with the refusal to play along. And yet, she knew it wasn't over. She heard the cruiser's tires rolling forward again, slower now, as if reconsidering, as if weighing options. The driver wasn't honking anymore. The laughter had died. Now it was something else, something heavier. An unsettled air pressed against her back as she moved, as she continued walking as if she weren't waiting for the next move. The car didn't overtake her. It lingered, trailing a few yards behind, a shadow that hadn't quite disappeared. She could hear the murmur of voices, low and tense, the shuffle of bodies shifting inside. They were deciding. Arrogance didn't vanish in a heartbeat. Some men didn't let go so easily. The corner ahead split into two paths, one leading towards the busier streets near the main road, where the glow of neon signs from late-night diners and gas stations still flickered, where there would be people. The other led deeper into the quiet, into the residential blocks where the houses stood dark and silent, where the street lights were further apart. They expected her to go toward the safety of the crowds. They wanted her to choose that option, to hurry toward the familiar glow of humanity, to prove that she was unsettled, that she was looking for an exit. She didn't. She took the quiet path. The street narrowed between rows of parked cars, their windows reflecting distorted shapes of the moving cruiser behind her. The asphalt was uneven, patched in places where the city had made lazy repairs. A cat darted under a fence, its shadow merging into the night. No voices, no movement, just the hum of the streetlights and the low purr of the car's engine. And then the car stopped. Not idling behind her, not rolling forward. It stopped completely. The doors didn't open right away. That would have been too abrupt, too obvious, but she could feel it. Feel the shift of weight inside the vehicle, the silent exchange of glances. They weren't done. They couldn't be done. Not after that, not after being left standing there like fools. A slow inhale filled her lungs. Her hands flexed slightly, fingers curling, then loosening again. Not out of nerves. Not out of fear. Just preparation. Just the body acknowledging what the mind already knew. Footsteps. One pair at first, then another. They weren't rushing her, they were taking their time, closing the distance casually, like they had all the time in the world, like they weren't even thinking about it. The first one spoke before she could see him, the same voice from before. The one who had walked beside her, the one who had flicked the hem of her dress like it was a joke, like it was nothing. Funny thing, he mused, his voice almost lazy, stretching the words as he stepped into her peripheral vision. You walk like you don't have a care in the world. She didn't stop. He matched her pace. A few feet behind, the second officer joined in. The older one, the one who had been driving. He wasn't laughing now. He hadn't laughed since she turned and looked at them. He was watching her differently now, assessing, measuring. Some people, the first continued, they'd take that as disrespect. The weight of the words was calculated, meant to be felt. But she had heard men like him before. Heard the way they leaned into phrases like that. Phrases meant to be both vague and direct at the same time. The way they tested limits without outright crossing them. Ronda inhaled slowly through her nose, exhaling through her mouth. Controlled, even, the way she had learned to breathe before a fight. Not out of tension, out of clarity. The second officer finally spoke, voice lower, heavier, not playing anymore. You think you can just walk away? She didn't respond. She didn't even glance at them. To acknowledge them now would be giving them what they wanted. She had spent years in a world where men tested boundaries. Sometimes in the ring, sometimes outside of it, sometimes with words, sometimes with the way they loomed too close. They never understood that silence was its own kind of weapon. And then it happened. The first officer moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just a shift in motion. A half step closer, a hand lifting slightly, fingers grazing the strap of her bag as if to tug, as if to get her attention. It was a mistake. Her body reacted before her mind had fully decided to act. Instinct, sharpened by years of knowing exactly when and how to move. Her right hand snapped up, fingers locking around his wrist before he could retreat. A sharp, calculated twist, a fraction too quick, a fraction too forceful, and his arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Not broken, not damaged, but controlled, secured. His body followed the motion, forced to lean forward, off balance. And then the second one moved. She pivoted, using the first man's weight to shift, to reset, her elbow snapping outward in a precise strike. Not wild, not chaotic. Just enough. Just sharp enough to catch him under the ribs, where the armor of his uniform didn't cover completely. Just enough to make him stumble. The moment was over in less than 3 seconds. The first man wrenched his arm away, staggering back a step, face twisting in confusion. Not pain, not yet, just shock. The second exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against his side, gaze flashing with something between anger and disbelief. And then there was the third one, The youngest. The one who had stayed in the car until now. The one who had been laughing the loudest before. He wasn't laughing now. He was watching, measuring. His hand was near his hip, not on his gun, but close enough to remind her that it was there. That he could change the course of this entire encounter in an instant if he wanted to. The silence stretched. Ronda took a step back, not retreating, just resetting. She met each of their gazes one by one without a word. The tension was different now. The game was different now. Whatever they had expected, whatever power they thought they held, it had shifted. A slow exhale, a beat of hesitation. Then the youngest one spoke, his voice tight, unreadable. "Let's go." The other two didn't respond immediately. The first officer still flexed his wrist as if testing it. The second kept his eyes locked on her, breathing a fraction too hard. But they obeyed. They turned, walked back to the car. No words, no jokes, no threats. The doors shut, the engine roared to life, and then they were gone. Ronda didn't move right away. She stood in the quiet, letting the night settle again, letting the weight of the moment disperse into the empty street. She inhaled, exhaled. Then she walked. Not faster, not slower, just forward. The night had changed, but the city had not. The streets remained as empty as before, the streetlights still flickering in their tired glow, the air still thick with the weight of a day long since settled into darkness. Everything looked the same, felt the same. But Ronda knew, in the quiet space where instinct lived, that something had shifted. She had seen it in the way they left, not in a rush, not in an open retreat, but in something worse, something unresolved, a pull that hadn't been severed completely. They had not walked away defeated, they had walked away deciding. That was the dangerous part. She turned the final corner that led to her apartment, climbing the narrow steps that led to the door of the building. The lock clicked open beneath her fingers, and she stepped inside, into the familiar dimness of the stairwell. The air smelled like old wood and laundry detergent, the scent of someone's late-night dryer cycle spinning in the basement below. She let the door close behind her and listened to the sound of it latching into place. A moment of silence. A breath. She wasn't shaken. Not in the way people might have expected. This wasn't new. This wasn't something foreign or unexpected in the world she had known. It didn't make it right. It didn't make it excusable. But it made it familiar. She climbed the stairs, her body moving through the well-worn routine of the night. The key turned in her apartment door, and the air inside was exactly as she had left it. The couch, the small kitchen, the shelves lined with books she hadn't touched in months. It was a space built for solitude, a space that didn't require explanation or justification. She dropped her bag by the door, walked to the sink, filled a glass with water. She drank slowly, letting the quiet settle around her. The clock on the wall blinked past midnight. It didn't matter. Sleep wouldn't come yet, not because of fear, but because of awareness. Her body was still keyed in, still waiting for something. She leaned against the counter, staring out the window. The street below was empty, the cruiser long gone, but she knew better than to think that was the end of it. They wouldn't let this go, not because of what had happened physically. No, that part they could brush off, excuse as a misunderstanding, tell themselves she had just reacted out of turn. That wasn't the part that would bother them. It was the control, the loss of it. The way she had taken something from them, something intangible but real. That was what men like that never forgot. She turned away from the window and exhaled slowly. It was fine. It had always been fine. She had spent years dealing with people who thought they could dictate the rules, who thought they knew what power looked like. She had spent just as many years proving them wrong. The next morning came like any other. The sun rose over the city, casting long golden streaks through her blinds. The weight of the night before lingered in the air, but did not press against her the way it might have for someone else. She moved through the motions of her morning, stretching out the knots in her muscles, taking her time before stepping into the shower. By the time she left her apartment, the city was awake. Cars honked lazily at intersections, pedestrians wove through sidewalks with the practiced rhythm of people who had done this 1,000 times before. The world had not stopped. It never did. She walked to the cafe on 9th, the same one she always went to, the one where no one asked questions about her past or her name. She ordered her usual, sat by the window, let the hum of the morning settle around her. And then she saw it, the cruiser. It was parked across the street, not in a way that seemed intentional, but in a way that was too coincidental to ignore. Different officers inside this time, not the ones from last night. But they saw her. That much was clear. And she saw them. It was never just one encounter. It never ended with a single night. She sipped her coffee, calm, unbothered on the surface, but beneath that was calculation. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't intimidation. It was observation. They were watching to see what she would do. She didn't do anything. She finished her coffee, left the cafe, walked past the cruiser without a glance. She felt their eyes on her as she moved, but she didn't stop, and she didn't look back. The sun had climbed higher by the time Ronda left the cafe, angling its heat down through a hazy layer of thin cloud. It was one of those mornings that began quietly, but held the heaviness of something unspoken, the weight of something waiting to unfold. The city moved as it always did, commuters with coffees in hand, early risers jogging along the sidewalks, delivery vans double-parked as engines idled. To anyone watching, she was just another figure in the flow, no different from the rest. But beneath the surface of routine, there was a subtle shift, a murmur beneath the noise. Something had begun. Back in the precinct, the officers from the night before didn't speak about what had happened. Not directly. The morning briefing went on as usual. Routine calls, traffic enforcement, a few notes about an upcoming inspection. But their silences were louder than any report. There was an edge to their posture, a tautness in how they moved. The youngest one, the one who had stayed in the cruiser while the others approached her, barely looked up from the tablet in his hands. His responses were clipped. The senior officer, who had driven, didn't offer the usual string of sarcastic remarks that filled the gaps during meetings. And the one who had laid a hand on her, who had laughed the loudest, barely spoke at all. Other officers began to notice. It didn't take long. Precincts were like living organisms. Every shift in mood, every deviation from normal rhythm was sensed quickly. No one asked outright, not yet, but eyes lingered longer than usual. Questions hung unspoken in doorways and hallways. One officer, Marissa Nguyen, part of the administrative staff, saw the trio arrive that morning and knew something was off. She had worked long enough around men like them to know when they were hiding something. It wasn't guilt that gave them away. It was ego, the kind that recoiled when its narrative was interrupted. She watched them disappear into the break room, shoulders tight, speech low, and something in her clicked. Later that morning, when she passed by the room again and heard a snippet of tense conversation, one voice muttering, "She didn't even say anything," followed by a curse and the scrape of a chair, she made a note of it. Not official. Not yet. But she didn't forget. Elsewhere in the building, in a small, windowless office with a fan that hummed too loudly, internal affairs moved through its own quiet machinery. A junior investigator named Todd Weaver, still new to the department, had received an anonymous message through the department's internal feedback system just before lunch. It was brief. One sentence. Watch Patrol Unit 42C. Something happened last night. He might have dismissed it. These things happened all the time. Petty complaints, department gossip, people stirring trouble. But something about the wording stuck with him. No accusation, no dramatics. Just quiet certainty. He made a note of it, pulled the shift logs, found the unit, found the names. Then he found something else. The same unit had filed no incident reports from the previous evening. No citations, no arrests, nothing logged for a 2-hour block of time where they were active, just GPS movement through residential neighborhoods. One of the paths traced through a quiet area near an elementary school. The timestamp caught his attention, close to midnight. Too late for a school zone, too quiet for a call. He flagged it for review. That afternoon, Nguyen saw something else. The officer who had stayed quiet in the break room was making a call from his personal cell in the parking lot, pacing between rows of parked vehicles. She didn't hear much, just a few broken fragments. She grabbed me. No, not like that. I don't know what she's going to do. She didn't intervene, but she made another note, and then, like a dropped match near dry kindling, it spread. Someone from dispatch mentioned overhearing a strange call between officers, vague and anxious. A technician in the IT department noticed a deleted body cam segment that shouldn't have been missing. A rumor started among 2 officers from a neighboring shift that someone had gotten into it with that fighter woman. You know, the one from TV. By the following morning, there was enough unease in the air to trigger an informal check-in. Captain Dale Vickers, a man not known for subtlety, called the 3 officers into his office without ceremony. He had already heard whispers. He didn't ask questions right away. He watched them as they sat. Watched the way the youngest one avoided eye contact. The way the oldest one crossed his arms too tightly across his chest. The way the third, the one in the middle, couldn't stop tapping his foot. When he finally spoke, it was quiet and measured. I heard something happened during your patrol. A beat of silence. Then the youngest one broke. I think we made a mistake. The words fell like a rock into still water. The other 2 turned toward him sharply, but it was too late. The crack had formed, and cracks, once formed, spread. The next few hours blurred. Statements were collected. Not formal reports, yet, but enough to make things move. The phrase, possible misconduct, appeared in an internal memo. A request was submitted to review the cruiser's GPS logs and body cam footage. Someone mentioned the name Ronda Rousey in passing, and suddenly there was a face to attach to the problem. The precinct's atmosphere changed. Tensions rippled through the building like waves. Officers chose their words more carefully. Conversations paused when certain people entered the room. The administrative staff whispered behind half-closed doors. Even those who hadn't been involved could feel it, the inevitability of exposure. Meanwhile, Ronda remained silent. She didn't return to the cafe that morning. She didn't post anything online. She didn't call anyone. She simply went about her day, calm, observant, unmoved. But she saw it happening. The shift, the ripple, the way a single moment, a single choice not to retreat, could begin to reshape a system that had long been left untouched. She didn't want attention. She didn't want headlines. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted them to feel it, the weight of their choices. And they were starting to. The youngest officer, his name was Tom Delaney, submitted a request to speak with Internal Affairs. Voluntarily. That alone was enough to send fresh waves of speculation through the precinct. When asked why, he simply said he wanted to clarify something. What he clarified changed everything. He admitted the details. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. He said they followed her. He said they joked. He said they touched her. He said she didn't react the way they expected. He said he didn't know what to do next. That afternoon, Captain Vickers called in his deputy and handed over the case file. "This is going upstairs," he said, voice flat. "We don't sit on this." By the end of the day, an official internal investigation had been opened. 3 officers were placed on administrative leave, and for the first time in years, the walls of silence within that department began to crack. Ronda received a voicemail the next morning. It was from a woman who identified herself as a lead investigator from Internal Affairs. The voice was calm, respectful. The message ended with a request. "We'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred 2 nights ago. You're not required to respond, but your perspective would be helpful." She didn't answer right away. She listened to the message twice. Then she deleted it. Not because she didn't care, but because she had already spoken. Not with words, with silence, with presence, with resistance. And that had been enough to start the fire. The city had a way of swallowing stories. Some incidents disappeared beneath the weight of bigger headlines, vanishing into the endless churn of news cycles. Others lingered beneath the surface, unspoken but known, a ripple moving outward in unseen waves. But sometimes something broke through. Sometimes a story refused to be buried. By the time Internal Affairs officially opened its investigation, the entire precinct was bracing for fallout. It wasn't just about 3 officers anymore. It was about the weight of perception, about the way authority maintained its grip on power. Rumors had spread beyond the walls of the station. The details were inconsistent, shifting with each retelling. Some said the officers had been caught harassing a woman on patrol. Others claimed she had fought back. A few said she was pressing charges, though that part was never confirmed. What was certain was this. The usual machinery of silence wasn't working. Too many people had heard pieces of the story. Too many eyes were watching. Ronda had no intention of speaking to Internal Affairs. It wasn't out of fear or reluctance. It was out of something deeper, a sense of knowing. She had spent years in a world where systems protected their own, where consequences were carefully measured, handed out only when necessary and only to the extent required to quell public unrest. She knew this would play out the way it always did. The officers would be disciplined, but not removed. Statements would be taken, paperwork filed, recommendations made. At worst, someone might lose their position. At best, it would fade away, becoming just another closed case in a locked drawer. But something unexpected happened. The youngest officer, Tom Delaney, agreed to a formal interview. It was voluntary. No attorney, no pressure. He sat in a small, windowless room across from 2 investigators and told them everything. He told them about the cruiser trailing her that night. The way they laughed, the way they joked, the way they escalated, step by step, feeding off each other's amusement. He told them about the moment it went too far, the flick of a hand, the lifted hem, the expectation that she would react in the way they had seen so many others react before. And then he told them what happened next. He described the way she stopped, the way she turned, the way something in the air changed, shifting the balance in a way he still couldn't explain. He told them about the silence, the weight of it, the way it had made him uneasy in a way he had never felt before. He admitted the approach afterward, the attempt to reclaim control. He admitted the mistake of reaching for her bag, the sharp, precise movement she used to stop him. He described the way the other officer stumbled back after a strike that had been too fast to predict. He admitted they had been the ones to escalate. The investigators listened, took notes. They asked him to repeat key moments, clarify details. When the interview ended, Delaney sat in silence for a long moment before standing. Before he left, he said one more thing. "I don't think she was scared of us." The investigator glanced up from his notes. "You think she should have been?" Delaney hesitated. Then he shook his head. "I think we were." The second statement sent another ripple through the department. It wasn't just a report anymore. It was a confession. Meanwhile, the other two officers refused to speak. They knew better. They had lawyers, union representatives. They had experience. They understood the game, but Delaney's statement had already done its damage. It was out there, recorded, transcribed, undeniable. Now, it wasn't just about their behavior that night. Now, it was about the integrity of the department itself, about whether they could be trusted, about what else had been hidden. A request was sent to retrieve footage from nearby surveillance cameras. An independent review team was brought in to evaluate the case. The media hadn't caught wind of it yet, but the walls were closing in. Ronda, meanwhile, went about her days as usual. She trained, she ate, she walked the same route she always walked. She passed through the same streets, unbothered by what had happened there. One evening, as she was leaving the cafe, a man approached her. He wasn't a reporter, he wasn't a police officer, he was a civilian, mid-40s, with a tired expression and a careful posture. "You don't know me," he said, "but I work at the precinct. I just wanted you to know people are talking, and they're scared." Ronda looked at him, waiting. "They're not scared of getting caught," he continued. "They're scared because they don't know what happens next. They don't know how this ends." She studied him for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. "That makes two of us," she said. The man exhaled, as if relieved she had spoken at all. Then he nodded back and walked away. 3 days later, the case went public. A journalist for a local paper received an anonymous tip. It wasn't detailed, just enough to confirm that an internal investigation had been opened, that 3 officers had been suspended pending review, that a high-profile civilian had been involved. The headline was restrained. Careful. Police officers under review, after allegations of misconduct involving former athlete. The article didn't mention her name, but it didn't have to. People connected the dots quickly. Her phone rang more than once that day. Old contacts, journalists, even a few former teammates. She didn't answer any of them. She went for a run instead. The city felt different now, not in a bad way, just different. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't looking for justice. She was just a woman who had refused to look away. And now the world was being forced to look with her. The wind had shifted, not in the meteorological sense, though the weather too had changed. The days grew crisper, the nights longer, the sun lower in the sky. But it was something else, something intangible that moved through the city now, passing from corner to corner, office to office, word to word. It wasn't a storm, not exactly. It was what came after. The stillness that followed noise, the clarity that settled once the shouting stopped. The article had been published nearly 2 weeks ago, and the precinct had not been the same since. The original ripple had become a wave. A name that hadn't appeared in the press for years was suddenly back in circulation. Her image had surfaced again, recycled through news feeds and think pieces. Most of the pieces were measured, cautious. They spoke in careful terms: alleged misconduct, pending investigation, unnamed sources. But the people reading between the lines knew. They always knew. Within the department, there was a strange, creeping quiet. The 3 officers remained on leave, though unofficial word was that at least one would not be returning. Another had hired legal counsel and refused all further interviews. Tom Delaney had reportedly stopped coming to the precinct altogether, citing mental health leave. No one dared to say his name too loudly. Conversations inside the building were clipped, rehearsed. No one knew who might be listening, and, more importantly, no one knew how far the investigation would reach. Every workstation felt colder. Every glance lingered longer than necessary. The sense of invincibility that had once permeated the department's culture had been fractured. Not destroyed, but no longer whole. Captain Dale Vickers kept his office door closed more often. He had stopped walking the halls in his usual commanding stride. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was calculation. He knew the politics of survival. He understood when the ground beneath him was shifting. He had lived through departmental shakeups before, but something about this felt different. He didn't say so, of course, but he knew. Everyone did. Seminars were announced, internal reviews scheduled, sensitivity training brought in under the guise of routine department development. The words were familiar, recycled from 1,000 memos before them, but the mood behind them was different. It wasn't about learning. It was about protecting. It was about optics, control, damage mitigation. Ronda watched it all unfold from a distance. She didn't engage with the media. When reporters showed up near her building, she exited through the side alley, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. She received dozens of emails, some supportive, some invasive. A few were from women she didn't know, sharing their own experiences, thanking her for not staying quiet. She read each one. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, and not by anything she said. It had been delivered in the act of standing her ground and walking forward when others would have turned away. She had no need to repeat herself. The echo of her silence was louder than any statement she could give. At the cafe on 9th, things stayed the same. The owner didn't mention the headlines. He brought her tea the same way he always did. No questions, no judgment. A few of the regulars offered her quiet nods, polite smiles, but said nothing. It was enough. The city moved on, but not forgetfully. The kind of story that had emerged didn't end with a single headline. It lingered. It reshaped conversations in places that didn't see the sun, in locker rooms, in break rooms, in late-night bars where off-duty officers nursed drinks and talked in coded language about policy and loyalty and what really happened. Some of them were angry. Some said she had gone too far, that she could have de-escalated. Others, more quietly, said nothing at all. They were the ones who understood. It wasn't about whether she could have done something different. It was about the fact that she didn't have to. One morning, as fall fully settled in, Ronda found herself walking the same route she had taken that night. She hadn't planned it. It wasn't an act of defiance or nostalgia. It was just where her feet carried her. The streets were as they had always been, quiet, worn, full of the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken encounters. She passed the elementary school, the narrow sidewalk where it had all happened. The street light had been replaced. New, bright, sterile. The trees above had lost most of their leaves, their bare limbs stretching overhead like long, open hands. There was nothing dramatic about the place now, no echo of violence, no stain of conflict. It was just a sidewalk, just another street. She paused for a moment and looked around. There was no one there, no watching eyes, no engine idling nearby. The wind rustled the leaves at her feet. A bird chirped from a telephone wire. Somewhere in the distance, a garbage truck hissed and clanked its way through a back alley. Life went on. She kept walking. There had been no apology, no formal acknowledgement from the department. No letters, no statements, no restitution. She hadn't expected any. That wasn't the point. She didn't want vindication. She didn't want a headline that painted her as a symbol. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was space. Room to exist without being handled. Room to walk a street without becoming someone else's stage. She had taken that space herself, that night, and in doing so, she had forced others to see her differently, not as a name, not as a story, but as a boundary. She reached the corner where the street turned, where the apartment buildings gave way to shops and traffic and the larger veins of the city. The wind pulled at the edge of her coat. She tucked her hands into her pockets and stepped forward. Behind her, the quiet remained. In front of her, life waited. And within her, nothing stirred but certainty. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe, check out the other videos on the channel, and share this one with someone who should see it.